I don't think I ever wanted to be an artist. I kind of just fell into it. I failed most of my GCEs, and I hung around in a school in Wellington in Shropshire for about 3 years, gathering O-levels and A-levels without any kind of rhyme or reason. For some reason, nobody ever talked to me about university or college or where I was going to go. And I think it's one of the penalties you pay for being a service child. Nobody takes ownership. Whereas if you're a kid in a normal secondary school, people know you after 8 or 9 years and they guide you. When you turn up in the first year of sixth form from nowhere and nobody knows you, everybody kind of disowns you and you find yourself doing weird timetables and weird things. So I gathered a clutch of GCEs, getting things together, not really knowing what I was going to do. And the school got fed up with me. And one of the teachers got me a job. In those days, you could go teaching without qualification. I ended up teaching in a junior school in Cannock for a tenner a week, which was actually more than a qualified teacher was getting because I wasn't paying any tax. And the head at the school said, you're going to need a qualification. And he fixed me up with an interview at Stafford Art College. And they took me. God knows why, but they did. I did 18 months there and then went to Bath Academy, which at its time was apparently considered to be the Cambridge of the art world. I chose it because it was an Inigo Jones house in Capability Brown grounds. It was bucolic, beautiful, and I had 3 of the best years of my life. Going to art college in the 60s, the mid-60s, was probably the best time to be an art student. It was fantastic. Everybody lived in. The studios were open 7 days a week. The caretaker would come around and lock it all up at 9. We'd be hiding in corners, and as soon as he'd gone, we'd all come out, the lights would go back on, and we'd carry on working. But it was fantastic. It was a really good experience. It was very fertile, and we were very, very blessed, very lucky. I was given application forms for teacher training, and that was like a vote of no confidence from the staff. They were just being realistic and recognising that making a living as an artist was virtually impossible. But for me, it was like saying, you're not going to make it as an artist, you've got to go and teach. So I ended up at Brighton doing the postgraduate teaching year at the University of Sussex. And I did teaching practice at Long Hill, which completely turned me off teaching altogether. So I ran a pub in Brighton for 4 years, and I had a studio across the road behind the Bird's Nest. There was an old feed store that we kind of took over and turned into a group. I believe it was still there, I'm not sure. It was probably legitimate now, but when we did this, we were squatting. And I painted, and I kind of went back to square one. I sat on the hill and did a landscape, completely pushed everything out that I'd got from college and rebuilt my kind of personal mythology. And I had a show. I had 45 pieces of work in there. I sold 43 of them. And it scared the shit out of me. I thought, it cannot be this easy. This is wrong. I'm obviously doing something wrong if it's this easy. So I started to change what I was doing, make it more abstract, make it less accessible. How stupid can you be? I got married, and my partner got a place at Postgrad in Manchester, so I ended up moving up north. And I went up and I worked as a screen printer for a while. And then I was asked to teach screen printing at the local college, and I got into teaching on a 4-year SIAD graphics course, and then asked to run the foundation course. So I ended up teaching for 15, 16 years altogether. But I had 3 shows a year. I was continuing to work. The moors, the landscape, skies, the weather. It was fantastic. Loved it. Until my partner, who'd finished postgrad, got a job as a senior designer in a London office. And we moved to London, and the lack of horizon killed it. I stopped painting within 3 years. I just couldn't get on without that sense of horizon and weather, which I didn't rediscover until I moved here to Seaford. Hence, all this starting up again. She was offered 3 projects to run by her employer. She's very good designer, and she couldn't do it on her own. So I found myself coming home from college and then spending 4 hours, 5 hours doing drawings, writing documents, sending out tenders, and we built a very successful practice. And in the 80s, we were one of the top 3 hotel design practices in the UK, which at the time was way ahead of the rest of Europe. And it was all going great guns until John Major decided to pursue the euro, at which point we went bust because the interest rates went up to 16%, and we had an office block in Chelsea that we'd bought, and the commercial mortgage rate went to 22%. Can you imagine what 22% would do to your mortgage? It did for us. We didn't go bankrupt because we insisted on paying everybody, but we lost the house, lost pensions because they can take your pensions if you're under 50, lost cars, everything virtually. Had to start again at 45. My father died at the same time, and basically I think it broke my marriage too. We rebuilt the practice, but it was never the same, and I didn't feel at home within it anymore, and eventually I had to leave the practice. I started writing about hotels. I became a critic. There's that thing that was said, if you can't become a critic. And I became a critic. I didn't want to run another practice. I'd built a practice up twice. And in the process, moved out, met my current lady, who sort of rescued me from a very dark place, and eventually moved out of London and eventually ended up here. And the painting has gradually come back to life through that process. It's partly a reworking of what went before. You can't leave your kind of personal mythology behind. But Seaford is lots of similarities to where I lived on the moors in Lancashire. I'm very conscious of weather here. I'm very conscious that from the garden you can actually hear the sea. I love walking the cliffs. It's opened the horizon up. You have big skies here, which you don't get in London because it's all buildings. And you did get in Lancashire. I mean, I remember standing on the back step of the house in Lancashire watching a thunderstorm rippling along the moors. And when I look at the back of the downs, I get that same sense of space. And for me, that's a real world. The cities aren't real worlds. They're constructs. They're artificial. Here, the fact the cliffs fall down, the fact the kittiwakes come every year, the fact I have a bloody seagull nesting on the roof next door to me that I know is going to keep me awake later on in the summer. It's all real. It has a reality that is timeless. And painting in part is being part of that Jungian stream of consciousness, that we share as human beings, that we have shared memories and shared instincts and shared intuitions, which all form part of a continuum, which we as individuals just are tiny segments of, and we're all contributing to it and we're all taking from it. And when you're in London, it's all fractured because the realities around you are so artificial. For me, it was like a rebirth of my creativity. And I was very lucky my partner bought me this studio for Christmas in 2013. It's been a blessing. And I still write, I still run a magazine about hotels, but it's in the process of being sold, basically. This was my first love, and I'm back into it with a vengeance. And the show in the Crypt is the first year of working here. It's all the work in it, or most of the work in it. I think it's about 3 major pieces that aren't produced here. All the other 30 odd are done in Seaford in response to Seaford. I used to work in a sketchbook all the time. Now I tend to use photography as a drawing tool. It's partly because for 20 years I've been photographing hotels first of all as a designer to actually record what it is we were going to change, but also for the website I've started to photograph hotels from a designer eye, as it were. And that I've got some ideas about how I want those photographs to be reused in paintings, and that will come, but I'm not there yet. I'm working towards that to a certain extent. Some of it is, you can see from some of the drawings on the wall here, response to the environment here. And I'll just get the sketchbook to show you. I sit and draw in the garden, and it started to come together after 6 months ago. So this is a little drawing of a magnolia, and it didn't develop into a painting, but you'll see the green and violet became a slightly obsessive chase. I did this little drawing of grass and daisies, which I was really pleased with, just sitting looking out of the studio door. That's become almost would have been a screen print years ago. Now it's a giclée, and I started playing with colour. The cross came out of the grid that artists use to square things up, and it was I did it originally a bit like Albers squares. The trouble with the Albers squares is the squares are really static shape, and it's very difficult to get any sense of movement into it, even though the hand mark is quite vigorous. So I sort of changed. It started off as being much bigger than this, and it was a square within squares, and then I just took a corner of it, as it were, and started to use it to explore the garden in this instance. So we've got the dandelions in the grass and the sky, and it's really just trying to get a sense of movement into a very static shape, the square, just simply through the gestural mark and the colour. This is where the painting started to develop. This was the beginning of the colour for this, looking at different ways violet and green worked together, and I did a load of drawings of the geraniums, which are in the other sketchbook over there, and then started playing with the colour. And this is where the big drawings that are in the show, this is where the gestation was. So I do use a sketchbook, but the photography started to push itself into the pencil drawings, and there's a couple of giclée prints which are a mix of drawing and photography in the show. They're bigger than this. There's more in them. This is just a kind of nascent form, a germ. I write a lot about my work too. It's the thing you were talking to me about before we came in here, about being too self-aware. It gets in the way. It does. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I initially had a show on offer in Worthing, but for one reason or another it didn't actually come to fruition. And I had got over a year's work, and I think if you work and you don't show, it's that old thing about if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody know it? Who was ever there? And I think, painting is a language. Every language has to have an audience. So you can't just sort of, what is it, the description, be an onanist in a corner. You have to show what you're doing to a public. So the Crypt I saw when we first came here, and I didn't know how it worked. So when the show fell down in Worthing, I actually looked around. The Crypt was already in my mind. And when I found that it was available and dark a lot of the time, which surprised me, I thought, why not? I've got to show the stuff. So I got in touch, met you, talked about it, and booked it. It was there, it's available. Hopefully, if this works, then I'll be doing this on quite a regular basis. I've extended what I'm doing in the sense that the friends have got an invitation to come along to a private view, and then there's the private view, which I've sent invitations out to people who've collected my work in the past, which means there's going to be people from all over the place, from Yorkshire, from London and so on, which I hope will help the Crypt to establish itself on a bigger stage than simply Seaford. But it's a nice space. The disappointment is that the crypt itself is so difficult to use. Maybe my interior designer skills can help in that at some stage in the future, but I'll experience it first. It is a nice space and it's a nice place. And in a way, it's a thank you to Seaford for giving me back my muse, for regenerating my creative self. You know, the move here has been absolutely brilliant in unlocking so many things. I'm a far better person for it, I hope. Poorer, but better. I want to do more. Yeah, I mean, this has been a brilliant studio. It has its drawbacks. I got a nice big easel there, and the first day I was in, I heaved it up, and it nearly made a hole through the roof. So I found a shop in Seaford that was selling off this second-hand school blackboard easel, which is, as you can see, it's perfect, it works. So it's limited height-wise, which will be maybe a problem in the future. I don't know whether it is. You can see that even here with these LED lights, you still get a dark shadow over the top quarter. But it's not been an impediment to working on it. The big impediment to working on it is me getting my ideas straight, which this is the third painting I've done, and I think I'm groping towards something which maybe is I don't know, might be a blind alley. I've got a big square canvas, which is going to be like the big square drawings, I think maybe. But I've also started doing a painting of that gate that's on the path that leads to the Seven Sisters on the back, which fascinates me, the idea of the open sea and the Seven Sisters, and then the gate that bars the way, and also the shadows on the grass. There's lots of atonalities in there, the green of the grass against the grey-blue sea beyond, and the dark brown and purple in the shadows against the green and the blue. So there's lots of colour to play with, and I've started making quite a big drawing. I want to kind of take the reality bits of this and maybe merge it with the completely abstract square things. I'm not quite sure where it's going. That's what's sort of at the back of my mind, and I'm just trying to let it happen. At the moment, I'm struggling to use the grid to make the image big enough to hold the mark, because the size of the image is determined by the size of the mark as much as anything else. If you make the image too small, you end up working like this, just with that part of your body. And it's like drawing from on the easel. You use your whole arm, your whole body gets into it. It becomes much more expressive. And I want the paintings to carry some of that too. That's where the drawings have gone. That's where the mark has emerged. It's got a lot of vitality in it. And I want to try and get it into the paintings. To a certain extent, it's always been there in the paintings, but it's always been contained and controlled. I suppose I've been afraid of it being too wild, and maybe the drawings are actually giving me the confidence to allow that wildness to come through more. So it'd be interesting to see where it goes. But the best advice I had when I left college was from a painter who told me, Michael Kidner, who died last year, and he told me, he said, if you're really serious about working, you've got to do at least 2 hours a day. Just do it. If you look at Hockney, that we were talking about earlier, all Hockney has ever done is work at his painting. And I suppose I was given too conventional an upbringing to actually be able to do that, or I wasn't brave enough to break the boundaries or whatever. But it's the right way to do it. That's what I'm going to do. Just work, paint.